"Get lost," Se-young sparred and added that she wasn't afraid of anything at all. In that, she's similar to her. Gang Hanul's face turned red and his mouth opened. Se-young pointed her hands at him and said unhappily, "Just to look at that idiot's face. Poor sheep, for someone like her, they are just a backdrop, nothing more." But she was interrupted by the sounds of a man approaching them. She looked in front of her, and they both realized that Haru Lee was standing in front of them, looking on without emotion on his face at how scared and worried they were. The guy started apologizing, fixing his glasses, waving his hand, mumbling something, and in his head he was thinking, what the hell, why can't he say a word normally? But then the girl reached out her hand to him for a handshake, leaned forward, smiled sweetly, and with her other hand tucked her loose hair behind her ear. She said she thought he had gotten into this school and asked him to take care of her. He shook her hand, shocked. Just like that, his normal life ended, for from that moment onwards his life became a living hell. From around the corner, an evil man was watching their handshake. Gang Hanul's classroom was on the top floor of the school. He was sitting at the last desk by the window eating rice and curry from his container. Just then, a guy with rectangular glasses walked up to him, scratched himself on the head and excitedly asked Hanul if he could ask him for a favor. He usually bought food for the guys who couldn't get it themselves, but right now he was having trouble with his leg. His leg was in a cast and he was leaning on a crutch. He said he was Tai Shik. Did he know him? Hanul scratched the back of his head, apologized, and said he had only recently joined this school. The freckle-faced guy mumbled that thank God he didn't know him. Hanul was wary, and a folded piece of paper was handed to him. The guy with the crutch went on to say that he used to bring food for these guys, but because of his leg he couldn't do it now. Could he do him a favor? Just for one day? Hanul looked at the names on the piece of paper and the guy leaned in sadly, asking too much trouble, right? He understands. Hanul stood up and waved his hand, saying not really, and he would help him. The freckled guy thanked him. The brunette quickly went somewhere, telling him to wait, he'd be back soon. Crutch thanked him again and looked at him silently. When he left the dining room with a large paper bag, Hanul didn't notice his friend. She called out to him and asked him where he was going in such a hurry. He turned around and said that Taeshik had recently injured his leg, so he was delivering food for his friends. They must be hungry, he would hurry up. The guy ran off and the girl was startled when she realized who had asked him to do that. Walking down the corridor, the guy held a leaflet in his hand, on which Office 1, 2 was marked. Finding the right door, he corrected his glasses and said, "Come to think of it, Taeshik does this every day. What a do-gooder." He showed himself in the door, waved his hand and shouted happily, "Who is Daechun here?" Everyone in the class turned to him with startled faces. The boy smiled awkwardly and asked, "Is this another classroom?" A voice came from behind him and said that this was the one. There stood a guy twice as big as Hanul himself. He was grinning slyly and clenching his fists. The frightened Hanul turned around and looked at him with his mouth hanging open. Not only was he a transfer student, but he didn't use social media and messengers like Kakao Talk, so he didn't know who Daechun really was, nor that Taeshik was his errand boy. And now, Hanul was sitting on a slope by a tree, green grass all around him, but he was hugging his knees thinking about something. Then Se-young came up to him and asked him why he was so sad. She sat down next to him and continued, asking what bad thing happened. If someone was bothering him, he could just tell her and she would take care of him right away. She looked at his sad face with a smile, and he told her that she better not worry so much about him. She objected, saying that he had always helped her without any questions asked, and now he wanted her to just leave him. He retorted by asking when had he ever done that. She asked if he remembered the second year of school, Han River. Without looking at her, he said he didn't remember. The girl remembered the day she fell into the river and asked if he was the one who jumped into the water after her. She laughed and asked if he even knew how hard it was to pull a person out who couldn't swim at all. But then she became serious and put her head down in front of her. He looked at her, and she confessed that that time she wanted to commit suicide, at which point he jumped into the water and started yelling, "Save me." He asked her why she wanted to commit suicide. She told him that her father was a drunkard, so he beat them all the time. She could barely stand it, but that day, the man she calls father. But suddenly she stopped, smiled, fixed her hair that the wind had mussed up and told him to forget it. She put up with everything because of her mother, but it was hard, especially for a girl in her second year of middle school. She lay down on the grass with her hands under her head and looked up at him and asked him if he remembered what he said when they got out of the water. The girl pressed on the guy's chest, and he was lying on his back. breathing hard, coughing. But he said he shouldn't get in the water here. The water here is just creepy disgusting. The girl laughed and asked him if he remembered how she had laughed then. Having laughed enough, something in her made her want to live again. Before he jumped into the water to save her, she hated guys. But after that day, she felt like she could trust them a little more. But still, he can't even swim. So why did he decide to save her? He replied that it was just someone falling into the water and he didn't know what to do, so he instinctively. Smirking, the girl asked that meant he had a crush on her. The guy shouted that no way, that never happened. She laughed and said it was a joke. It was beautiful sunny weather outside and it was very gloomy in Office 1, 2. Hanul was standing with a bag of food in his hands, and in front of him sat Dae-chun, and there were other guys standing in front of him. All of them were grinning predatorily. Shaking with fear, Hanul apologized that the bread Dae-chun had asked for wasn't in their canteen. The man crossed his arms over his chest and replied that he hadn't done anything wrong. It was just that their taishik hadn't explained things well to him. He asked the taishik standing next to him if that was true. The one got scared and started apologizing, saying that he would do anything. He would make it right. The giant stood up and walked over to Hanul and said that even if it wasn't his mistake, he couldn't just let him go if he wanted to set an example. He added that it would be Taishik's job, or maybe he wanted to be an errand boy again. The giant looked threateningly at the boy and he was terrified, but then she shouted and lunged at Hanul with her fists. The other guys started laughing, grabbing their stomachs and pointing at them. Dae-chun said Taishik was strong. Have someone take a video of it. But then he looked at the entrance to the classroom and told the guy with the rectangular glasses to be easy because their elf princess was watching. He had thought that people committed suicide simply because they couldn't bear to live like this anymore. But now he realized that that was not the real reason. Dae-chun had told Hanul in his ear that his work must be kept secret. If anyone found out, the punishment would be severe. His sister, though young, is already quite sexy. Let them play forever. He'll make him have fun wherever he goes. The reason is not because he can't live that life. You decide to kill yourself when you simply have no other option. When all your options have faded into oblivion, you start looking for a path you don't have to take. At least that's what he was feeling right now. He stood on the edge of the roof. It was night. There was a lantern next to him. He didn't know what he should do now. Then someone lightly touched his head. He fell to his knees and covered his head with his hands. She started apologizing and saying that he would definitely get the money for them.